I never intended to dive into this investigation. It all began with a basic genealogy project, the sort that millions undertake annually, tracking family trees, sifting through old records, discovering ancestors, routine activities. However, somewhere amid the census information and immigration documents, I stumbled upon something that didn't add up. A pattern emerging not within one family line, but across dozens, perhaps hundreds. The further I dug, the more puzzling everything became. Names transformed, not slowly, not through marriage or natural language evolution, but abruptly, entirely. Within one generation, sometimes within 12 months, complete family identities got rewritten. The standard explanation? Immigration, assimilation, clerical mistakes? But what if things weren't that straightforward? What if these changes weren't random at all, but coordinated erasures, deliberate actions meant to disconnect entire populations from a heritage they were never meant to recall? Let me reveal what I discovered. In America between approximately 1880 and 1920, immigration documentation reveals something odd. Families arriving from Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and sections of Russia came bearing one set of names, complex surnames with peculiar suffixes, linguistic patterns that didn't align with the regions they supposedly originated from. Then, within months, sometimes within weeks of being processed through Ellis Island or other entry ports, those names shifted, not abbreviated, not anglicized in the conventional sense we grasp, but replaced. A man named Tartikoff becomes Thompson. A woman named Tartarescu becomes Taylor. Kids with the surname Tartarian get registered in school files as Turner, Travis, or Thomas. This occurs not to a single family, but to thousands across numerous entry points over decades. The standard narrative claims this was voluntary, that immigrants opted to adopt new names to blend in, to escape discrimination, to begin anew in a different world. Sure, that happened. Plenty of documentation confirms it. But this was different because the pattern repeats with disturbing precision. For anyone unfamiliar with the Tartarian theory, here's the basis. Researchers suggest there existed an advanced civilization, call it Tartaria, call it the Old World, that survived until surprisingly recently. We're not discussing ancient times. We're discussing the 1800s. This civilization supposedly left behind architectural proof that official history struggles to clarify. Elaborate structures, consistent design philosophies, advanced engineering, and they're found everywhere. San Francisco, St. Petersburg, Melbourne, Buenos Aires, Kolkata. Buildings sharing the same architectural vocabulary, the same sophistication level, the same curious details. First floors buried underground, windows half submerged as though some catastrophic event, a mud flood, covered the original ground levels. The mainstream explanation? Different architects, different periods, convergent design trends. But here's what made me link the architecture to the name changes: the timing. The identical period when families were erasing their Tartarian surnames, roughly 1870 to 1920, coincides almost perfectly with when these magnificent buildings start getting attributed to local architects with conveniently thorough paper trails. When World's Fairs suddenly display technologies that seem to materialize from nowhere only to disappear just as fast. When old maps quit mentioning Tartary as a location. The buildings remain, the mud flood evidence remains, the architectural mysteries remain, but the people who might have built them, their names got changed. That's no coincidence. It can't be, because if you erase the names, you erase the builders. If you erase the family lines, you erase the knowledge of who actually created these structures. The pattern repeats with disturbing precision. Wherever you discover Tartarian architectural evidence, you find genealogical erasures in the same rough time frame, same phenomenon, same locations, same systematic silence. If you believe this was purely an American occurrence, examine Europe. During the 1890s and early 1900s, census records throughout France, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Russian Empire display similar discontinuities. Families with surnames rooted in what researchers characterize as Tartar or Tartarian linguistic origins suddenly disappear from administrative records. Not because they died, not because they relocated, they simply became other people. The Tartakovs of Moscow show up in the 1880 census. By 1897, they're the Tarasovs. Different name, same address, same occupation. No explanation in the records. In Prussia, a family named Tartenberg shows up in property records for 3 generations: 1820, 1850, 1870. Then, in 1891, the property gets listed under the name Tannenberg. Same parcel, same family structure. The transition documentation is missing. This presents a simple yet critical question. Why would families with established names, property rights, and social standing voluntarily erase their identities across multiple countries, all within the same narrow time window, all without proper documentation, and all while acting as though nothing had changed? The deeper I went, the more I uncovered. France, Italy, Spain, Poland, Romania. The pattern repeats. Here's where it gets stranger. In China and Mongolia during the late Qing dynasty, administrative reforms between 1880 and 1910 included widespread standardization of family names. Official records described this as modernization, a method to streamline census data and taxation, but the specifics tell a different story. Families in regions historically associated with Tartar populations, Inner Mongolia, Manchuria, parts of Xinjiang, saw their ancestral surnames replaced with Han Chinese equivalents, not transliterated but replaced, and the old names erased from official records. In Japan, during the Meiji Restoration, similar reforms occurred. The surname Edict of 1875 required all citizens to adopt formal family names. But what's rarely mentioned is how many existing names, particularly those with connections to the Ainu or Northern Tartar-influenced regions, were quietly eliminated from registries and replaced with approved alternatives. Why the urgency? Why the coordination? Why the silence? The Ottoman Empire presents perhaps the most glaring anomaly. For centuries, the Ottoman administrative system maintained detailed population records, tax registers, military conscription lists, property deeds. These documents are remarkably comprehensive, except for one thing. Between approximately 1870 and 1920, records of families with Tartar or Tartarian surnames become increasingly sparse, not absent, sparse. When they do appear, they're often noted as having adopted new surnames under various reform edicts. The old names simply quit appearing. But here's the thing. The Ottoman Empire was multilingual, multi-ethnic, and relatively tolerant of diverse naming conventions. Greeks kept Greek names, Armenians kept Armenian names, Slavs, Arabs, Kurds, all maintained their linguistic and familial identities. So why did Tartar names need to disappear? The official explanation collapses here. If assimilation and modernization were the goals, why target this specific ethnic linguistic group so systematically while leaving others intact? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. We're discussing a phenomenon that spans multiple continents, dozens of countries, and vastly different political systems. Monarchies, empires, emerging democracies, colonial administrations. Yet within the same approximate time frame, all these systems implemented similar policies that resulted in the same outcome: the systematic erasure of Tartar and Tartarian surnames from official records. No international treaty mandated this. No global conference coordinated it. No single power controlled all these territories simultaneously. And yet it happened everywhere, all at once. This is the coordination problem. How does something like this occur without central organization, without documentation, without anyone anywhere questioning why entire family lineages were being rewritten? The evidence suggests something much larger than bureaucratic coincidence or organic cultural change. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this entire phenomenon is the silence. When other ethnic groups faced persecution or forced assimilation, there were protests, uprisings, documentation of resistance, letters, diaries, newspaper articles, some record of people saying this is wrong, this is happening to us. But for the Tartar name changes, nothing. No documented resistance, no recorded protests, no family letters saying the authorities forced us to change our name, no newspaper articles decrying the erasure of cultural heritage. The silence was deafening, and that silence raises more questions than any answer could resolve. Were people threatened into compliance? Were the changes so normalized, so embedded in bureaucratic routine that nobody thought to resist? Or is the documentation simply missing, removed, destroyed, or hidden in archives we haven't accessed? We don't know, and that's where the official narrative becomes impossible to ignore. Not because of what it explains, but because of what it refuses to address. If you search for academic studies on this phenomenon, you'll find almost nothing. Not much, almost nothing. There are papers on immigration and name changes, studies on assimilation, linguistic analyses of surname evolution, all valid, all well-researched. But on this specific pattern, the coordinated erasure of Tartar and Tartarian surnames across multiple continents within a specific time window. Silence. A few scattered references, a footnote here, a passing mention there. But no comprehensive study, no historian asking why this happened, no sociologist examining the scale and coordination, no genealogist mapping the systematic nature of the erasures. It's as though the academic community collectively decided this wasn't worth investigating, or couldn't investigate, or was subtly discouraged from investigating. The deeper I went, the more doors closed. Archival materials suddenly unavailable. Records lost in fires. Entire genealogical databases with inexplicable gaps in exactly the years and regions where these name changes occurred. Not everywhere, not all the time, but enough. Enough to notice. Enough to wonder. Names aren't just labels. They're markers of origin, carriers of history, links to ancestral lands and forgotten peoples. When you change a name, you don't just alter a word, you sever connections. You make it harder for descendants to trace their lineage. You erase linguistic clues that might point to a different history than the one officially recorded. And if you do this systematically across generations, across continents, you can effectively erase an entire heritage from collective memory. Within 3 generations, nobody remembers the old names. Within 5, nobody knows to look for them. Within 7, the very idea that there was something to look for seems absurd. Is that what happened? Did an entire cultural identity get systematically dismantled through something as simple as name changes? And if so, why? What were they hiding? What heritage was so dangerous that it needed to be erased, not through violence or conquest, but through paperwork and bureaucracy? Some traces remain, In remote villages across Siberia, Mongolia, and Central Asia, you can still find elderly people with surnames that carry the old linguistic markers: Tartakov, Tatarsky, Tatarescu, names that according to official histories shouldn't exist or should have naturally evolved into something else by now. But they didn't. They persisted in isolated pockets, in places where bureaucratic reach was limited, where the reforms didn't fully penetrate, where families held onto their names despite pressure to change. And when you talk to these people or read the few ethnographic studies that document their stories, a common thread emerges. Their grandparents or great-grandparents spoke of a time when everyone had these names, when Tartar surnames were common, unremarkable, normal. Then something changed. Authorities came, papers were issued, names were recorded differently, and slowly, quietly, the old names faded, not by force, not through violence, through administration, through paperwork, through the simple bureaucratic act of writing a different name in a ledger. And here's the strangest part. Nobody seemed to think it was worth mentioning. You might be wondering what any of this has to do with architecture, with the grand buildings and advanced infrastructure that other researchers associate with Tartarian theories. Everything, because if you erase the names, you erase the builders. If there's no record of people with Tartarian heritage, then those people couldn't have built anything, couldn't have possessed advanced knowledge, couldn't have been part of a sophisticated civilization. They simply didn't exist. And without the names, without the genealogical paper trail, there's no way to connect modern descendants to whatever came before. No way to claim inheritance, literal or cultural. No way to say my ancestors built that. The architectural mystery and the genealogical erasure may be two sides of the same coin. Erase the names, and you erase the claim to the structures. Erase the family lines, and you erase the knowledge those families might have carried. It's elegant in a horrifying sort of way. You don't need to destroy buildings. You just need to ensure that nobody alive can prove their ancestors built them. The more I researched, the more I realized this wasn't just about names. It was about memory, cultural memory, ancestral memory, collective memory, all of it systematically severed through a process that on the surface looked perfectly reasonable. Immigration, modernization, administrative efficiency. But strip away the justifications, and you're left with an uncomfortable reality. Entire populations were disconnected from their heritage within living memory, and nobody seemed to notice or care. How does something that massive happen without mass awareness? The answer, I think, is that it was normalized, bureaucratized, turned into routine. Each individual case seemed reasonable in isolation. A name change here, a clerical adjustment there, nothing sinister, nothing worth questioning. But when you step back and look at the aggregate, it's staggering. So what actually happened? I don't have definitive answers. Nobody does. That's the point. But I can tell you what the evidence suggests. Between roughly 1870 and 1920, there was a coordinated global effort to erase Tartar and Tartarian surnames from official records. This effort spanned multiple continents, involved dozens of countries with vastly different political systems, and occurred with almost no documented resistance or public acknowledgement. Why? What were they hiding? What heritage was so dangerous that it needed to be systematically erased, not through violence, but through bureaucracy? Was there a global directive we don't know about? An unspoken agreement among world powers to rewrite certain genealogies? Or was this something even stranger? A kind of cultural self-erasure where the descendants of Tartaria themselves chose to forget? And if so, what did they know that we don't? Names carry stories. Lineages preserve knowledge. When you erase both, what else disappears with them? Building techniques, organizational structures, historical events that don't fit the approved narrative? We'll never know because the people who might have passed that knowledge down were systematically disconnected from their past. Their children were given new names, new origins, new stories, and within a few generations, the old knowledge simply vanished. Not destroyed, forgotten. There's a difference, and that difference haunts me because somewhere in dusty archives and forgotten documents, the truth might still exist. The original names, the family records, the connections between modern populations and whatever came before. But finding it, proving it, that's the challenge. And maybe that's exactly how it was designed to work. I started this investigation looking for ancestors. What I found was a void. A carefully constructed, bureaucratically maintained void where an entire heritage used to be. And I can't stop asking why. Why go to such lengths? Why coordinate such a massive effort across so many countries? Why erase these names and not others? What were they so afraid of us discovering? The official history offers no answers, only silence, only gaps, only the persistent, maddening refusal to acknowledge that something happened, something big enough, important enough, threatening enough that it required a global effort to erase. And that's what keeps me digging. Not because I have answers, but because the questions won't let me go. Because once you see the pattern, once you notice the coordinated erasures and the impossible coincidences and the deafening silence, you can't unsee it. And you can't stop wondering what we lost when they changed the names. Where are you watching this video from? Write in the comments which city or country you are from. We would love to know who is watching with us. Share your thoughts, observations, or questions. Every comment is important. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Together, we are creating a community of curious explorers.